Hey, welcome in. I'm Rita, and this is the story I'm telling myself. If you've ever felt like you're standing in your own way, you are not alone. Let's get into it. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Story I'm Telling Myself podcast. I'm so happy that you are here. I apologize for the delay. StreamYard was having just a little glitchy moment, but we figured it out, worked around that. Thank goodness. If you are here for the live recording, thank you so much for coming. We love having you in the comments. We love interacting with you. We record the show live for you because this is something that brings me much joy. So please hop in the comments, say hello, welcome one another, and welcome our guest today, Elsa Valentine. Elsa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Rita.
It is a pleasure to have you with us today. We are going to talk today about your personal story around checking the box on mental health and thinking that it's something on your to-do list that you can get done. But before we get into that, I want you to tell everybody who you are. So I don't know, in 4 or 5 sentences, who are you, Elsa Valentine?
I am an entrepreneur, an artist, a coach, a horse lover, an adventurer. Yeah.
I love that because I think when you say that, I think of all the things in our initial conversation, like all the overlap points we had of places where we connected, which is the beautiful thing about getting to know people, right? You can find all kinds of connections that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be there. So, Elsa, we're going to allow you to walk us into your story here in a second. So take us back to maybe the antecedent, the prequel kind of part of the story of what was happening in your life before you had your first episode where you realized that your health was really in jeopardy.
Well, I guess it was like a steady decline during my childhood. So I remember one defining moment in my teenage years where I passed out for the first time. And looking back, like that was the beginning of my nervous system entering the faint stage, literally. So before that, I was very lucky that I grew up with horses in the countryside, in the nature. I was always like wildly creative. I wrote my first business plan when I was 10, but I was living in a very unstable household. So my mother had some serious mental health challenges. We think bipolar. And so it was very volatile, very inconsistent. And as a younger child, I was really able to run away with my imagination. And I was very fortunate that I could go outside and be in the nature and be with the horses, which is something I didn't really understand the significance of until much later. But yeah, then I guess it got to a critical point where I couldn't cope anymore in my teenage years. And then the decline started, the first one.
So it's interesting. That's the first time I've heard 10 years old when you wrote your first business plan. Do you remember what it was for?
Oh, yes. I designed a stud, breeding horses, and it was crazy. I think there was like 10,000 acres and maybe almost 1,000 horses, and it had so many different components. And like, yeah, I think I was really trying to impress my dad whilst like connecting with something that I was like deeply passionate about. But looking back, it was wildly ambitious, and I'm happy to say that today I have news that my mare is pregnant. So my 10-year-old dream is coming true on a slightly smaller scale.
But there's something incredible about the freedom of 10. In the work that I did with Shirzad Shaman, who wrote Positive Intelligence, he talks about getting in touch with who you were before the age of 10. There's something about at that age of 10 where we start to develop in a different way. But up to that time, we do have this freedom and exuberance and this limitlessness inside of ourselves that before the world, after the age of 10, and it has a lot to do with the education system, I believe, and what we expect of children once they pass that age, to sit quietly and follow the rules, and all we start putting restrictions, and we start
Mm.
internal stories about who we're supposed to be, and all of these other things that get in the way of the free self that you were at 10 years of age. But how lovely for you to be able to remember her and reconnect with her again. I see that Meryl is with us and Lisa's with us. Hello. So happy to have you with us. Horse therapy is becoming quite popular. It's very true. My daughter is planning to be an occupational therapist, and I really see hippotherapy being one of the paths that she takes eventually because she is a horse woman as well. So let's go ahead and jump forward though and talk about. So you intimated this, your nervous system. So talk to people a little bit about, because this is wisdom you've gained over the years, but talk to us a little bit about what happens with our nervous system, and then walk us into the story for you.
Well, our nervous system there are different stages. You can be in a regulated place, you can be in the heal your nervous system material, which I really love. She refers to it as having different tiers. So you have like completely calm, you have very relaxed, you have playful, and then you start to get into fight or flight, and then further along, freeze. And I realized that I had gone into the freeze. Well, I didn't realize until much later. It wasn't actually until after I experienced burnout for a second time that I actually started to understand. Well, I became acquainted with my nervous system because it wasn't something that was really talked about. And even after numerous trips to the doctor, in my earlier years, in my later years, not so much, but it's never a part of the conversation. Other things come up, like maybe you're depressed, or and but never the mention of that. So I started passing out a lot when I was a teenager, and in between that, I was incredibly dizzy. I thought I'd lost my intelligence because I literally couldn't focus. I couldn't think. I lost my energy. It started to feel like I was kind of shrouded, like there was like a haze around me. I couldn't sleep. And it got to a point where I could barely even walk up the stairs. And then at that point, my parents had taken me to see neurologists and stuff. And I didn't have a brain scan because they didn't understand what was happening. And one thing that I find really interesting that I still don't totally comprehend was that whilst my body was in a completely dysregulated and disassociated state, I was still having access to the experience of awe and fascination and euphoria, not the whole time, but when I would get tingles down my whole body, and it was very blissful. Not all the time, but it was happening frequently. And I did make the error of telling my parents this, hoping that they might understand or help me understand. But that was when I was whisked off to see the neurologist. So yeah, and then my late teens, went to see a doctor because it got to a critical point, and he said, maybe you're depressed. And my dad said to me, at one point, I went to the doctors, and the doctor said to me, maybe you're depressed. And for him, it was like there was an elephant in the room, and he was like, yeah. But for me, I was like, no, that's not it. But I will be if life carries on like this, because this can't be right. I can't be fine as you're telling me. So at that point, because I'd grown up around horses and I'd spent so much time observing them, I'd seen how you could put them in a massive biodiversity, and they knew what they needed. and what was good for them. And so this was my first step towards asking my body, like, what do you need? And it started with my diet, like, because I figured that we profess to be a very intelligent species, but yet, like, you put us in the supermarket and we like self-destruct. So
We get tempted so easily by all the things that are really,
yeah.
really bad for us. Although, let's be honest, horses will do that too. I mean, certain horses will graze on grass to the point that they can barely support their body weight, and so.
Some, I guess, yeah. Naughty ponies. So anyway, based on that premise, I decided just to sit with myself and ask, like, what do you need? And then what happened was I did just a huge renovation of my diet. I cut out like 80%, and I'm not sure if it was the diet or just the inquiry that was the big first step towards becoming in like a deeper relationship or forming a relationship with myself. But that was a huge turning point, and from that moment my energy levels started to lift. It was like the haze started sort of drifting away, and I started having access to like inspiration again. And yeah, it was just the beginning of the process, but it was a very significant milestone.
So I just want to pause here. One, I want to say, Laura Marie, welcome. Saw you enter the room. Thanks for joining us. One of the things that you're saying, Elsa, is you're really naming this mind-body connection. That when our environment around us is creating this unsafe stress, trauma, sort of traumatic type of environment that you're describing from your childhood, that part of what that does is it impacts us physically. And you carried that for so long that it became very extreme for you, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah.
That your nervous system, when your nervous system completely dysregulated, then your whole physicality started to unravel a little bit. And I can really, we talked about this, I can relate to this because I have a child who is very much in the throes of a similar situation where she just finally got to see a cardiologist about her tachycardia, and the cardiologist said, your heart has forgotten how to be in the right rhythm. It thinks it's running a marathon all the time. And so we're going to try this medication, and we've had success before, and see if we can retrain it so that it gets out of this constant, because it's in flight. Her body is telling her heart rate to stay operating in flight all the time. And so I think this is not something that you can. We've sought so much medical help, and so many well-intended people have no idea what's going on or how to help. And so I think that's one of the reasons that your story is so important. But I love that part of what you did in the middle of this is when you couldn't get answers outside of yourself, you trusted yourself, that you turned inward and sought your own agency in this. And it was effective. It was almost too effective. Tell our listeners why it was almost too effective.
What do you mean?
Well, because the checking the box. I mean, you started to get better, and you thought, "Oh, I've conquered this," right?
Well, yeah. So it was many years later, actually, that I realized that I hadn't uncovered the full truth, and so from that point, my energy levels continued to rise, and I became like able to function again. So I went off on numerous adventures. I traveled the world. I worked with sharks. I was an artist. I was a horse trainer. And as I look back, I realized it was all part of the healing process. And then at some point, I felt like I was doing pretty good, or I felt ready within myself to explore the next stage. And I realized I'd always been following these pillars of fascination that I had. And so one was art, one was horses, another was business. And I knew I wanted to make a meaningful impact. So I started exploring, like, what is it that I want to contribute to the world? And because of my experience with diet and food and the massive impact that it had, I explored, well, I wanted to create a nutrition company. And at first I thought it was an accessibility problem, that the choices that were most widely available were kind of deleterious to our well-being. So I was thinking about healthy vending machines, and then whilst looking for products to put within that, I realized there just weren't any good ones. So then I made a slight detour and innovated a range of snacks. And during that time, building that business, it was like I was so excited. I was like in my early 20s, I was like bursting out of the blocks. I was like throwing so much energy at it. And I was meditating, I was eating well. I really thought like I kind of had things under control. And yet, after a couple of years, I was at a trade show and I realized that my body was shutting down again. And as our brand was all about health and vitality, I really had to take myself away from the stand because I was making my brand look bad. And that really, that was another big moment. I walked into
Well,
a
yes. I
company.
mean,
Yeah.
you were this huge trade show. I mean, your brand is like taking off. Like everything seems like it's going right. I mean, that's what I want listeners to really hear and understand. And welcome, William. I saw you come in the room. Thanks for joining us. But this wasn't a depressive time in your life. This wasn't a time of struggle. This was actually a time of high success. But with that success, what were the stories that you were telling yourself that you feel like were contributing to the stress building and eventually the burnout that happened right in the middle of the trade show?
Well, I don't think that the stories were at the conscious level. I think it was more that my nervous system was still deeply embedded in the past, and it didn't have the capacity to support my vision and my ambition and all the things I was going for. And so it was a successful time, but it was also very challenging because we were pushing really hard and we were experiencing rapid expansion and contraction and challenges. And I just kept pushing. And I was operating with a still dysregulated nervous system. And oh, is that a fly?
Yeah.
Sorry. So my nervous system was still stuck in the past. It was still very dysregulated. So my window of tolerance was very small. And whilst I was circumnavigating that with enthusiasm and passion and inspiration, because I really was aligned with my purpose and I loved what I was doing. But my body was not caught up. So then I realized that vision and physiology don't necessarily move at the same pace. And that was when I realized that I needed to go and do some deeper healing.
So emotionally, what was that like for you? I mean, when you talk about it now, it sounds so logical, but I'm imagining in the moment it was not so logical.
Well, it was still logical at that point because I never really learned how to actually drop into my body, because I had been so disassociated and so disconnected. Like I'd been completely numb from my childhood years and my teenage years. And when I finally learned how to breathe properly, certain like intense emotions started coming through. Like I realized I was like, after I'd moved out of complete dissociation, I was like living with crippling anxiety for a very long time, and I didn't even acknowledge. I didn't know that what that was, because it was just like very normal. So yeah, it was a complete disconnection from my body, and at that point, it was a very cerebral process, being like, well, how have I lost perspective in this way? Because I thought I'd been like managing my body, but that was kind of it. I'd been managing my body. I hadn't like formed a relationship with it. So whilst
Oh, wow. Wait, that is super powerful. That idea that you were managing your body, but you didn't have a relationship with it.
I'm really sorry, the dogs are going crazy.
That's
you
what
hear
happens when you live on a farm. Yes, we hear them, but that's okay. So what does it mean? What did you learn? Help us understand that learning to have a relationship with your body. Can you talk to us about what that experience was like?
It was a very gradual process. It was like step by step, learning how to like actually develop interoception, like learning to pay attention to sensations. Like I actually realized that for a lot of my life, I had never really known like my own preferences, or I didn't really have like I was kind of completely transparent and neutral in the room. Like I learned that in order to survive, I had to be like water. And so actually learning like to, it was a very long process to get in touch with my body and ask like, what do you want? Like, what do you need? And figure out like, you know, what I actually, what my needs were, what my boundaries were, what my preferences were, and paying attention to all the little sensations, like following them around, like learning to breathe properly was a really big one. I realized that when I was younger, it wasn't until I learned how to dive, free dive specifically, that I learned how to do a full diaphragmatic breath. And I realized like how much tension had been locked down there. So yeah.
I think that this is fascinating because I think that you are naming things that people struggle with. And I've heard Glennon Doyle talk about this on the We Can Do Hard Things podcast as well. That people that are in the struggle that you're talking about of not really knowing how to physically be in their bodies, that's all you know. You don't realize that you're different than other people, or that you're experiencing something, or that is a limitation within yourself. So for listeners who are maybe very early on in the journey of discovery about that and trying to navigate that once they have that awareness, is there anything you can share about your journey, Elsa, in terms of finding that awareness and being able to stay in that awareness and move through it that could be helpful to them?
It's really a process of finding the moment, finding time regularly to check in with yourself and ask questions. Like, one of the questions I find really powerful is, what is the most subtle sensation I can feel in my body right now? So that really brings you inward, and it really makes you begin to search for, what am I experiencing? It brings forward the louder sensations, and then it brings forward the quietest one. And when you start to just bring your awareness to the different sensations, and you allow them to move and unfold without any judgment, just curiosity and compassion, and just learning to be with your full experience like you would be a friend, and using your breath to breathe into different areas of your body, experimenting with breath work, has been something that I found like incredibly powerful. Playing around with your perspective. So when we are in fight or flight, then we normally have a very focused perspective, but widening it out to be peripheral, and then playing around with like using your whole body to sense outward is it's an abstract concept, but if you try it, it's very, very powerful.
And you're going to tell us a little bit more about this and where you've gotten to in your entrepreneurial journey. But before we jump to that part of the story, Elsa, can you talk a little bit about once you became aware that you really needed to develop this relationship with yourself, not just manage yourself, but develop the relationship with yourself? What did that start to make possible for you?
Well, there's a really amazing quote that I love by Gay Hendricks, and it is that people often believe that there are two faucets or taps, like one for negative emotion and one for positive emotions, and they can just turn off the negative emotions one and everything will be fine. But in reality, there's only one. And so through building that relationship with myself and learning to embrace like the full lived experience, every dimension of it, that welcomes more awe and inspiration and joy and connection. And the more connected we are to ourselves, like the more we can connect to others for sure. And so that also led to much deeper relationships. And yeah, in every dimension of life, really.
I've heard, we were talking before the show launched about the World Happiness Summit, which is one of my favorite conferences, and many of the speakers who have been a part of our show here, including Dr. Fred Luskin. And, one of the things that I've learned through my partnership and learning with the Wahasu organization is that all of our emotions are important information to us. It is all about our relationship that we choose to our emotional state. And and we talked about this last week as well, for those of you that were with us, resistance. When we tell ourselves a story that we need to resist feeling negative, all we
give
do
it more power.
Is give it more power. Exactly. We give it way more power. And that the actual relationship we want to have with negative emotions is curiosity.
Yeah.
What is it telling us? And not being afraid of what it's telling us, just trying to just be neutral and inquisitive, just like you said, like you would be with a friend, treating those as friends who come to, and you sort of greet it without judgment and curiosity and understanding, and wanting to have understanding about that. And so I appreciate you sharing that, because I think that it's again, there's social training, there's environmental training that we receive in young childhood, because our negative, and I was this way as a parent. I'm just going to own this as a parent. I'm not going to thrust this on everybody else, although I see it all the way around me. But when my kids would cry, it would be like, oh, don't cry, don't cry. Like, okay, let's just make this right. Right. I mean, instead of getting curious and saying, oh, you're having big emotions, what is that about? All of those things. It was just like, okay, let's just stop that. Let's just redirect. Let's get to a happier place. And so, so there's a lot of conditioning that happens to us throughout our formative years to steer clear of those negative emotions.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, like every emotion has a positive intention, right? Is there to carry an important message or to protect us, or like nothing is there as a mistake. And I think one of the really important reframings that came for me was realizing that my body wasn't broken and it hasn't done anything wrong, but it was like an incredibly intelligent partner that had protected me through my most vulnerable years, and it was working perfectly. And like, to be incredibly grateful for that, because like if it hadn't protected me in the way that it had, then I don't know how I would have coped. I probably wouldn't. But the fact remains that we're not living in the same environment that we were, and perhaps our brains haven't evolved, or cannot evolve at the rate of technology and stimuli. So the amount of stimuli that we're having to deal with on a daily basis is more than maybe our ancestors had to contend with in a year. So it's a lot for our nervous systems to manage, and yeah, so maybe we need some support. That takes a village, right?
Indeed, and I love that you said that despite all of the health issues, and they were true health issues. I mean, at a young age, this is the thing that frustrates me so much about my daughter who just turned 24. It's like when your body's behaving like you're in your 80s with the pains and the limitations and stuff, it's so easy to be angry and frustrated and mad at your physical body. But it's also some kind of a protection mode, right? That it is trying to do its best. So you build this amazing company, you're flying high, you start to burn out, you realize that you have been managing but not really healing and building the relationship. So you step away from that company, you start that process. Take us forward in the story. What happens next?
So I moved to Portugal, and I took my foot off the accelerator, and I decided to really explore and go as deep as I needed in order to really learn how to create sustainably. Because I knew that it wasn't over, but I knew that if I wanted to be able to create something meaningful, I needed to heal myself first, so that I had the capacity, my nervous system had the capacity to create something that could grow exponentially. It's kind of like you have to put the oxygen mask on yourself first, right? And so I went on
Yeah, be honest before you move forward. Be honest. Did you have a moment where you just allowed yourself to be in your pity party, to be depressed about the fact that your body was letting you down, or were you still just really able to stay in that cerebral space?
Because I'd moved to Portugal, I was filled with like new stimuli and dopamine levels running high. I was like living by the beach. I was swimming in the water every day. I was bummed out that I hadn't managed to resolve things, that I needed to step away from this, because I had a very strong, powerful idea in my head of how things were going to go, and I had to let go of that, and so that was really challenging. But it wasn't at that point. I already knew that I needed to take full ownership of everything that I was experiencing, and so, like you said before, what we resist persists, right? And so
Right.
that was a line that I had going on in my head for a long time, and I realized that I just needed to go on a deeper inquiry, and it was very challenging. It was quite desolate at times, because I was really expecting to just keep growing from strength to strength, and well, I was really hustling, and to step away from that and like to learn how to do nothing for a while, and to find stillness, and then to learn to create from not a place of hustle and adrenaline, and to connect to my endogenous kind of way of living, rather than exogenous, rather than like I should be doing this, there's all this pressure, investors, all that. So it's a big shift and a big recalibration. But I was lucky that when I moved to Portugal, I was living in a co-living place for entrepreneurs. And so for the first time in my life, I was really, really surrounded by a community of like-minded people. And so that was really supportive for me during that process, to be able to explore and talk the same language with people. And yeah, it kind of helped me to make sense of my situation a little bit. Yeah.
And that has led you to your app that you are creating. So once again, just like you wanted to create this nutritious suite of snack food that could fill a vending machine that people could be good to their bodies, now you are likewise using yourself as inspiration to take. So talk to us a little bit about that work.
Right. Well, I realized that my entrepreneurial journey has really followed my healing journey, like completely. It's really fascinating, even the art at the beginning. But yeah, Innate was born from that day when I asked myself, like, how have you lost perspective in this way? Also, like, I didn't ask myself in a very kind way. I was really annoyed with myself. So compassion is another thing that we really champion, self-compassion through Innate. And it started off, well, perspective is really the thing. And it's really hard to see the picture when you're standing inside the frame. And what really kind of spoke to me was the fact that I didn't notice the decline until I'd got from a place of like, well, I was still functioning under an illusion, but I was feeling good about it, to not being able to function at all. And so at first I was really interested in how I'd got from that point to that point. And then I started thinking about, like, when I was in my lowest moment, like, what had I forgotten in that moment that the most inspired and joyful version of me had remembered and would say to me. And I started gaining a lot of curiosity about gaining access to my wisdom in the moments when we need it. And then I was very blessed to be sponsored by the Neuromindfulness Institute, who put me through some training. And then I realized that that point of curiosity was kind of based on how the brain actually functions, and how it is basically like a magic library. And so when we are feeling a particular emotion, then it searches for memories and observations and thoughts that can confirm that state. So our whole world becomes more tunnel visioned in that moment. And yeah, so then I started thinking about, well, maybe if I record a message to my future self when I'm feeling inspired and joyful, then the app can bring it back to me when I'm feeling the opposite. And that's kind of how it evolved. So it's essentially a way to create a conversation between your past, present, and future self based on emotion. And through this process, we can really elevate our perspective over our internal world and find patterns, and really explore triggers. So it can be super fascinating if you're really pissed off, for example, or angry. You can externalize it with a video entry. You can unload it, and then you can hand it over to your future self, and the app will bring it back to your future self when you're feeling calm and as far away from the emotion. So then there is like the potential for objectivity, and then you can afford yourself the perspective of like a friend, because you're not in the emotion. So then you can see things clearly, and then you can respond back to your past self with a new reframing, a new perspective. And that's based on a phenomenon called cognitive reappraisal, which is essentially one of the ways that we rewire our brain. And so the whole thing has kind of, unfolded from that one question, and it continues to unfold. Yeah.
So the app Friends is called Innate, Innate, and it's not launched yet. Are you in beta now, Elsa?
We're almost launching our external beta testing. Yeah.
So if you want to know more, we'll have information in the show notes for you to reach out to Elsa and learn more about Innate. I think this is an incredible tool and opportunity. I see so much benefit, and I don't think that you have to have experienced the level of trauma that you had in childhood to find value in what you're bringing into the world, Elsa. I mean, this idea of past, present, and future, and really being able to give ourselves perspective so that we stop resisting and fighting, and we have a container for holding some of that space for ourselves is just, it's such an incredible idea. I'm so excited to watch this move forward in the world.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you so much. That's really sweet.
So we are in our final minutes. Is there any closing wisdom that you would like to share with our listeners, Elsa, who are listening to your story, recognizing some things in themselves about, maybe it's about this idea of managing self versus really having a full relationship with self? Final ideas, words of wisdom that you would want to share with them.
Yeah, I would say explore ways that you can lean more fully into your full experience. So pay attention to any moments where you contract and you move away from you try to move away from the intensity of an emotion, of an experience, surrender to it and let go of resistance and be curious. Ask, what is the highest intention of this experience? And through really leaning in fully and embracing every moment that comes, we really can turn up the volume on our aliveness and our joy and our inspiration. And I think that for me is how we find true empowerment.
So we got, stay with me, friends. I know I'm going a little bit long here, but you just said something very important. You said surrender to it. And the story that I tell myself in moments of strong emotion is, don't surrender to it, because this could go so explosive, so fast, so wrong. Step away from the landmine. That is the story. Not surrender, but step away from the landmine. How do you reconcile that? Because I know I'm not the only person who fears the landmine.
Right. Well, through self-awareness and through observing yourself and your reactions and your triggers, then we can create a bit more space. And in that space, we have choice. So depending on the severity of the situation, like if you're in a moment where something like very extreme has happened and you feel like you're going to explode, then I would say, like, don't surrender to that in that moment, but then take yourself away and find a safe space to then go into it and surrender. But for the most part, emotions that we're experiencing, like, we're not in any real danger. There's nothing crazy that's about to happen. And when we contract and we resist our experience, it just creates like an emotional debt. So does that answer your question?
I think it does. Yes. I think you might have to come back in next season, and we might have to just talk about this idea of surrender and go deeper into this, because it's such a fascinating topic, and I can see where it would be a whole second conversation we could have. But for now, Elsa, I am just going to have to say I agree with Merrill. He said this has been such a provocative conversation, and he is right. You are brilliant. Your story is fascinating. And I think that you are showing people a pathway who need to find a pathway. Because when you are in the throes of that nervous system dysregulation, and that is what is driving your life, it's just such a difficult place to be. And it's
Yeah.
hard to have perspective in that space.
Yeah.
So I feel like you're throwing a lifeline to many people, Elsa. And I'm so happy that you came to the story I'm telling myself to share about this.
Thank you so much, Rita. Thank you for having me.
It was my pleasure. So, friends, please come join us again next week. We have another great conversation. Sabrina Parsons will be here. And until then, make sure that you go out to your favorite podcast platform, find this episode, and I want you to send it to 3 friends, because what Elsa is offering us is too powerful. This community needs to be part of bringing the wisdom of Elsa's story and her innate app out into the world. We are charged with this opportunity now. Let's not let it slip through our fingers. Thanks to everyone who joined us live. Thanks to everyone who is listening. If you're listening on the podcast, share this with some friends. This is too good to not pass along to others. Thank you again, Elsa, and I'll see everybody back here next week. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us. If you love this episode, leave us those 5 stars and be sure to share this with a friend. And if you didn't, don't worry about it. See you back here next week.